Hi, 7th grade. Welcome to the week of fishes. This week, we're going to start with our notes on fishes, and then you're going to watch a great movie called Oceans. So, it should be a good week of e-learning and science. Let's get started. All right, Roman numeral 1, before we get started into the fishes, we are moving into a brand new phylum, which is the chordates. And within this phylum, we are going to be talking about three classes: the bony fish, the cartilaginous fish, and the jawless fish. So, before we get into the fishes, we've got to determine what exactly makes a chordate a chordate. And as you know, that the one main distinguishing characteristic of chordates, and we've talked about it over and over again in class, is you have to have a backbone to be a chordate. And there you can see the little baby's backbone right there at the beginning. There are also, through that backbone, a dorsal nerve cord that runs through, and that's why people who have back injuries can become paralyzed because of that nerve cord that runs all the way through your spinal cord. So when your vertebrae gets severed, sometimes that nerve cord that runs through it also gets damaged, and therefore the rest of your extremities cannot receive messages from the brain. The third characteristic to make a vertebrate a vertebrate is pharyngeal gill slits, or a chordate a chordate. And those are just like little folds. We do not obviously have gills. We had little pockets, and they're more like folds and not slits, that are present in the developmental phases of all vertebrates. Okay, so chordates is the biggest phylum we're going to study, and since it's so big, we break it down into the classes. And, arthropod had 4 classes, but it was still relatively small enough that we could study it as one big group. But chordates are the most, I think, interesting, obviously, animals that we love. We do book reports on them as we're young kids, and we love them when we go to the zoo. These are the animals that we are very familiar with. So we will study each class separately, except for the first 3 classes, because they're all fish. So the jawless fish, cartilaginous fish, and bony fish, we are going to group all together and study and call it the fish chapter. And then later on, we will study the amphibians, reptiles, aves, and mammals, each as their own class. Now, in your notes, you are going to need to make note as the difference between ectotherm and endotherm. Ectotherm means that you are cold-blooded. You regulate your body from the outside. Ecto means outside, therm means temperature. So meaning that, snakes and lizards, they have to use the sun to get their internal temperatures warm, and then they will go into shady places to cool. And they've got to regulate their own temperature. That's why you don't see lizards in Antarctica in cold places, because there's just not enough heat there for them to get their body temperature up to where they need it. Endotherms, on the other hand, don't rely on the environment. Endo means inside, therm, temperature. So they regulate their temperatures within their bodies. And we are endotherms, and that means you're warm-blooded, and our body temperature is constant. We are at a constant 98.6 degrees if we're healthy. And if we vary too much from that point, we are, in fact, sick. We have a temperature, so just a few degrees higher, and that indicates we are not feeling well. So our body does an amazing job keeping us at this constant body temperature. And there's only 2 classes that are endotherms out of all 7 classes, and that is us, the mammals, and the aves, the birds. And so, of course, in Antarctica, you'll see polar bears, and down at the South Pole you'll see those penguins, because they are aves and they're able to keep their body temperature at a constant healthy temperature. Now on to our classes that we are going to study, and obviously we are studying the fishes. And to be a fish, you have to have 3 characteristics, which you probably could have guessed most of these. To be a fish, you have scales, you have gills, you have fins. So our first class that we're going to study is the jawless fish. And the biggest thing about them, obviously, since we're calling them the jawless fish, they have no jaws. Well, what does that mean? If you feel your jaw and you move your mouth up and down, you're able to move your mouth, your teeth up and down. Well, since they don't have jaws, their mouth is usually more circular in shape. And if you think about sucking, they attach via suction to their prey that they're eating. They don't have scales, but they're still fish because they do have some fins to them, and the gills really help put them in this category. They are parasites and they are scavengers. And two examples of them are the lamprey and the hagfish. And aren't those babies just beautiful? Not. Now, the biggest class, and if it's not a jawless fish, which are only your lamprey and hagfish, and it's not your cartilaginous fish, which are sharks and rays, every other fish belongs to this class, the bony fish. And to be in this class, it is just your typical fish. They have jaws. That means their mouths move up and down. You can see that little fish there as our example of a typical bony fish. You can just imagine that mouth moving up and down. They, of course, have scales, and before we eat them, we usually descale them, take those scales off. And they have many, many fins that offer them propulsion and movement and steering capabilities. And we'll go through the fins in just a moment. They have a swim bladder. Sharks do not have this. They have big livers full of that secrete oil that give them some buoyancy. But fish, to make their lives easier in the ocean, they have these little pouches, gas-filled sacs that they can fill up with air or deflate with air that helps them move up and down within the water. So it's just kind of like having a little balloon in there. When they want to float up a little bit, they can fill their swim bladder with air or gas and float upwards, or they can let some air out and move downwards. The operculum is what is kind of circled there in blue. And those of you who are anglers, fish people, you probably are very familiar with the operculum, because when you hold up your catch and are showing it off in all of its glory, you usually grab the fish by its operculum and mouth, and you kind of just hook your finger through there to hold the fish up for your whatever trophy pictures. So that operculum covers their gills. Sharks do not have this operculum, and neither do lampreys. So that is a unique feature of the bony fish. 95% of all species are bony fish, and there is just a tremendous variety of cool bony fish. I don't know if any of you have tanks, fish tanks at home, or if you are a big fish enthusiast, but you can really make this a hobby, is getting into fish with your fish tanks. Kind of a cool thing to do. And of course, they are marine and freshwater, both. Marine means they live in the ocean or in our lakes, ponds, streams. So you don't have to copy anything down on this page, obviously, but I just wanted to show you some great variety of bony fish. We have, the flying fish up at the top, and the anglerfish at the other top right-hand side. Even your seahorse is a bony fish. It has gills, fins, and scales that make it a fish, even though it swims upright, which is unique to it. And the cool lionfish and the parrotfish, catfish, flounder down there, the flatfish on the bottom, goldfish in your fish tanks. So lots and lots of cool bony fish, and even, obviously, many more than this. As promised, we are going to go through each of the fins and their functions. And when we dissect our sharks next year, you will know all the shark fins. That'll be one of your ID quizzes. The first one is the biggest fin usually on the fish, and that is your caudal fin or tail fin. Caudal means tail. And if you can just imagine, they use those big fins to push them through the water, so that gives them propulsion and movement. The pectoral fins, if you think about where your pectoral muscles are at the chest, here are their pectoral fins, and that helps them move up and down in the water. Pelvic fin, if you think of where your pelvic is, at your waist area, it is right down here on the fish. And that again also gives them some turning, stopping, slows them down, different functions like that. The anal fin is down here by the lovely anus, and that just helps stabilize the fish as it's going through water, keeps them in a nice straight line. And you've got the famous dorsal fins. Now, sometimes they have more than one, but dorsal fin keeps them upright and balanced, and that's probably the most famous fin when we get to the sharks, those dorsal fins that come out of the water and the Jaws music plays. Dun, 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 dun. What is cool about bony fish is that dorsal fin is oftentimes you're able to move it up and down. If I just put my hand across the top of that fish, that dorsal fin would probably retract downward. And shark fins obviously don't do that. Their dorsal fins stay upright at all times. All right, kids, I know it's been a lot of notes, but here is our last bit of notes for today. The cartilaginous fish, they have jaws, they have gills and gill slits, no operculum that covers up those gill slits like in the bony fish. They have a cool lateral line that moves down their body and it helps them detect vibrations. Why do they need to detect vibrations? They're usually, that helps them go after their prey that are weak and swimming around. They can feel the vibrations in the water. Ampulla de Lorenzini, when we dissect the fish, the shark, those are little holes up in their snout area, and that allows them to detect also electric currents of their prey. They have a very keen sense of smell. They are carnivorous, most of them. There are some of the larger ones, like the whale shark, that are filter feeders. So there are a few gentle giants out there, but we mostly think of the great white when we think of sharks, and those are definitely carnivores. Their scales are denticles. They are very tough and protective. It's hard to bite through them. And they do have both internal and external reproduction, and that depends on the species we are talking about. So they have either or, depending on the species. So that wraps up our fish notes, and we will talk about the sharks more in depth next week. Have a good day, kids.